First John chapter 3. I'm in my friends Danny and Anita Hinkle's beautiful home in Peoria, Arizona, and it's been a wonderful break. Everybody should have friends in their life like Danny and Anita have been in Debbie's and my life. The threads that go back in this relationship are, to me, they're simply amazing. My dad came to say yes to Jesus on his terms, nobody called it discipleship in the late 40s. They just called it working with a guy. Well, Danny's dad was one of the ministers at the Cincinnati Avenue Christian Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who guided my dad, suggested he consider going to Bible college, took him to Oklahoma City, got him settled in. He and my mom and my sister settled in there, and Dad began his training for what was his career and lifelong ambition in loving and helping people and guiding them toward God's design. Well, okay, so that was, about the time Danny was being born. Of course, I didn't know him then, but then without me being in the picture at all, Danny goes to Midwest Christian College, gets his education. He and his wife, Anita, moved to Muskogee, Oklahoma, where my wife, Debbie, was in the youth group. Danny was her youth minister, and I think, just my observation, I believe she would say so too, he was the most influential man, possibly between Danny and Anita, the most influential people in her life, and planted seeds of discipleship and growth and desire for God in her heart that are today still producing fruit. Well, as God often does, He brought our paths, Danny and Anita's and Debbie's and mine, across again. Danny presided with my dad at our wedding. Then it was 2 or 3 years later, Danny became the senior minister at the church I was serving as youth and music guy in Oklahoma City, Antioch Christian Church, and we served together for about 1.5 years, and then I moved to Tulsa. Well, Danny and I and Anita and Debbie and I, all the four of us have stayed very close and connected throughout the years. And now, when we lived in Las Vegas, and Danny and Anita here in Peoria, at least twice a year would get together, and sometimes when we could pull it off, even more often. And I've shared this with him. I talk about, there he is, right, walking through the background. Come over here, Danny, where you can get in the picture.
Who are we with?
This is with my Soul Care with Stevie boy family.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
This is the guy, saved my life on more levels than one, but if I hadn't been with him, God would have had to have a very spectacular plan to keep me alive on January 10th, 2011, 10 years ago. So
I was glad God used me.
All I can say is,
I've got something that I'm holding on.
Listen, I'm good with you holding that.
Yeah.
So that's there's a much longer story, but God's design for a person's life is, it really defies description and almost defies imagining and believing. And yet, here we are in 2021, still dearest of friends. That sets us up. John often talks about the people he wrote this book to as dear friends. And he also often says dear children. And in verse 7 of chapter 3, he says, "Dear children, do not let anyone lead you astray." We've talked about that. The one who does what is right is righteous, just as he is righteous. The one who does what is sinful is of the devil, because the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. That, I'm going to come back to that. We've talked about it, but here's the thing. He destroyed the devil's work. The devil's ultimate work was to make it impossible for you and me to be reconciled with God. And Jesus destroyed that plan. He destroyed that work when he paid for the sin of every man, woman, boy, and girl for all of time, past, present, and future. And then verse 9, no one who is born of God will continue to sin because God's seed remains in them. Big idea. Nobody continues to sin. If you've been born of God, you're not going to continue to sin. Does that mean you'll never sin again? I don't think, I've mentioned this before to you, I don't think that's the point. But I think the point is you will not intentionally continue to sin. It has almost everything to do with my ambition, with my volition. And my hope, my dream is that one day I'll mature to a point that I'll look back on a day and think, no sin. I'm not stuck in that habit. You see, many of the sins that we commit are simply habit. We have let ourselves do this for so long, it's become our pattern. And what John is saying is that pattern does not continue. I don't get to look into your life unless you invite me to and identify these patterns. And unless I invite you into my life, you don't get to do this for me. That, without an invitation, that's called criticism. There are people who say criticism is your best friend. Well, I'm not sure. I think input that is invited is easily one of your best friends. And if your heart is right when you receive criticism, you can examine it for its validity, which also has to do with consider the source. When it's valid, you learn what you can from it, you harvest what you can from it, and you leave the rest alone, and you leave it behind. But that's not really what John is getting at is, when you are born of God, you don't continue these sinful patterns. And a really wise child of God will invite other mature children of God to speak into their lives so that if I am stuck in some pattern that amounts to me keeping on sinning, that they can call me out on it. When people invite me into their life on a level where I get to do with them, here's what I try. I'm diligent about my intention being, what I'm going to say is when I see that in you, my question will almost never be, why did you do that? Because you know what? There's sometimes, I don't know why I did that. I'm looking at it now, and that's my question. Why did I do that? It may not be a fair question, but the question I ask is, how can I help you not do that again? See, that's really the end goal of discipline, isn't it? When you invite somebody in on this level in your life, you're inviting them to help you discipline yourself so that you can break patterns that are holding you back and dishonoring God and giving the devil a foothold in your life. Okay. No one who is born of God will continue to sin because God's seed remains in them. Oh, here's what I get from that. There's a part of God that stays in them, in you, in me. And I'm going to talk about that next time when we get together for So Care with Stevie Boy.